here would be an example calculation of biomagnification. I give you some figure like 1 part per million of toxin in the water, and then a sequence of who eats who, and you just start multiplying up till you reach the total. So a tiny fish eats 100 algae buds that have 1 particle of toxin. The tiny fish now has 100 particles in it. If a salmon eats 20 of these tiny fish, if a salmon eats 20 chub, which each ate 10 minnows, and each minnow ate 5 of these tiny fish, well, then the salmon would have 20 times 10 times 5 times 100 buds is 100,000 units of toxin. You eat 10 salmon a year, that means your body now has 1,000,000 times the toxin that was in the water. And in actual fact, these numbers can be much worse than that. So if I were to draw it in a flow chart, this is what you see here. 10 particles times 100 eaten is 1,000 in each fish. So if each piece of algae had 10 particles in it. And then you could just make up example numbers all the way up to the largest fish. So what biomagnification means is the higher you eat on the food chain, the greater the number of toxins you'll have. The older the animal you eat is, the longer it has lived, its bioaccumulation would be greater. In the water, it's a much stronger effect. So fish are more contaminated than land animals. Eating high-fat meat increases the amount of toxins in your diet because the persistent toxins are basically fat soluble. For the same portion size, a person who has less body mass gets the greater concentration in their body. So that would mean if, say, father and his son each ate the same amount of fish, the son would be nailed worse because it's got less tissue to be spread out in. Now, here's the scariest part of all, and this should really frighten the girls in the class, is mother's breast milk is made partially of fat. The fat comes from the mother herself. Fat does not leave your body intact. You never pee or poop out fat. You redigest it. But breast milk has fat in it that came directly from the mother's organs. And so the mother may test to have a certain level of toxin in her body, and she will have even more in her breast milk. Mothers who have been drug addicts and took drugs while pregnant, not pregnant, but while breastfeeding. There was one just this year in 2018. She was doing methamphetamine and breastfed her child, and the child died overnight from the greater concentration in the breast milk. So that's really scary. This is why, if you look at toxin loads in the environment, they are based on man, woman, and child. So if you look at a fish count, they'll say an 80-kilogram man, he could eat 3 fish from this river a month. The 20-kilogram child is allowed to eat maybe half a fish. The pregnant woman, they might say avoid fish. And the breastfeeding woman, they're like, definitely do not eat any fish. So this is really scary because the healthiest food on planet Earth has now become something we warn people not to eat. And that's why it should be such a scary, scary topic. So when you have a baby one day that 90% of you are going to, and the mother's breastfeeding, remember this. We're passing these toxins on to the next generation. And that's why it's so frightening. So these fish catch limits, they print. This is Island Lake in Orangeville. The general population can eat 4 fish a month of these lengths, and the sensitive population, which says women of childbearing age and children under 15, shouldn't touch the fish in the lake. These are some videos we're going to watch in class, but they're well worth watching on your own. This is what long-term exposure to arsenic does. It's one of the few that shows up on the skin. The water in Bangladesh has naturally occurring arsenic, so where the people have drank from the well water, by the time they're in their 20s, they've biomagnified so much, or in this case, concentrated so much toxins out of the water that they're suffering from severe arsenic poisoning. And there's going to be a generation in Bangladesh that are going to have brain damage from this. Lead still shows up in old stuff. I like to do a lot of woodworking, restoring things. I will not touch old yellow paint. Won't strip it because yellow was often achieved with lead. So if someone says, "Hey, I got an 80-year-old bassinet for a baby and it's painted yellow, let's use it," I would avoid the yellow paint. You'd have to have it tested to see if it's lead based. PCBs are an oil found in a lot of transformers. And this guy, Viktor Yushchenko, may have been actually poisoned by Putin. Someone dumped PCBs in his meal. And this is what his face looked like before, and this is after. Most people notice all the scarring and injuries this huge dose of PCBs did, but the internal organ damage is significant. Canada has poisoned a lot of natives, and mercury literally cuts holes in the brain. You're never the same again. And we'll look at some videos in class on acute mercury poisoning. These fluorescent lamps all contain mercury. They're supposed to go back to a waste dump and have the mercury taken out, but not all municipalities have a place to get rid of them. Some people will smash them. When you do that, you'll inhale a puff of mercury vapor. There are YouTube videos of kids allowing other children to smash them over the head with the fluorescent lights, or they run into them, proving how brave they are. Skipping the glass cuts, every time you pop one of these bulbs, you are releasing a tiny amount of mercury right in front of you as a vapor. You're asking for long-term trouble doing that. Do not break these bulbs. This is a woman whose child suffered from mercury poisoning when she was carrying him. This picture is from the 1960s. You see the length of this person. He's like 45 years old. The mercury poisoning affected her, but her fetus being smaller, and as she breastfed him, he received the highest concentration. And it looks like Japan may be repeating it by putting dolphin back on the food menu. Dolphin is amongst the most poisoned animal in the world. Their flesh is often unsafe to eat. This can get so bad that a number of years ago, there were whales washing up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that seagulls were dropping dead, eating their bodies. The whales had to be cut up by men in hazmat suits and put in toxic waste drums. They had such huge levels of mercury in them, millions of times more than what was in the water. So we really have to get around our head that if you can't see it and you can't smell it, it could come back and get you.